The massive crystalline chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with the simultaneous translations of 1,000 different species. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the human delegation's modest platform, her dark eyes scanning the towering forms of aliens that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. Above her, the Zephyrian delegates floated in their atmospheric bubbles, their tentacles writhing with what she had learned to recognize as amusement. To her left, the insectoid Crothery clicked their mandibles in rhythmic patterns that served as their version of laughter. The human requests weapons authorization, announced High Chancellor Vorthak, his massive crystalline head refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns across the walls. The Etherian's voice resonated through every translation device simultaneously, carrying undertones of condescension that needed no interpretation. For their kinetic projectile systems, the chamber erupted in what could only be described as galactic giggling. The Draconis delegation, massive reptilian beings whose scales shimmered with embedded technology, actually slapped their tails against their platforms in mirth. Even the typically stoic mechanoids emitted harmonic frequencies that their translators rendered as chuckling sounds. Elena maintained her composure, though her jaw tightened imperceptibly. She had expected this reaction, but experiencing it firsthand was different. The humans had been part of the Galactic Council for only 3 standard years, ever since first contact had been established. In that time, they had been relegated to observer status, watching as species with technologies that seemed like magic made decisions about trade routes, territorial disputes, and military actions. Esteemed delegates, Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. Humanity requests the standard military authorization granted to all Council member species. We seek only the right to defend our territory and contribute to Council peacekeeping efforts. High Chancellor Vorthak's crystalline form pulsed with different colors, a sign Elena had learned indicated deep thought or, in this case, barely contained amusement. Ambassador Vasquez, while we appreciate humanity's enthusiasm, we must consider the technological disparity. Your species still relies on chemical propulsion and metal projectiles. These are curiosities, not weapons of war. The Zephyrian delegate, Ambassador Zelix, spoke from within her atmospheric sphere, her tentacles creating complex patterns as she communicated. My dear human friend, your weapons fire solid matter at merely supersonic speeds. Our plasma accelerators operate at significant fractions of light speed. Your bullets would simply vaporize upon contact with our defensive matrices. Furthermore, added General Thrax of the Crothery military caste, his 4 arms gesturing dramatically, your primitive explosives rely on chemical reactions. We harness the power of controlled stellar fusion in weapons the size of your fingernail. Surely you understand the impossibility of meaningful military contribution. Elena had prepared for this moment for months. The human delegation had run countless simulations, studied every available piece of information about Council species and their technologies. The conclusion was always the same. By galactic standards, human technology was laughably primitive. Their fastest ships crawled at barely 1% of light speed, while Council vessels casually exceeded it. Their most powerful weapons released energy equivalent to small volcanic eruptions, while Council armaments could crack continental plates. I understand your concerns, Elena replied diplomatically. However, Article 7 of the Council Charter states that all member species have the right to contribute to collective defense efforts according to their capabilities. We are not requesting access to your advanced technologies, merely permission to utilize our own. The mechanoid delegate, Constructor Prime Zeroth 9, spoke in perfectly measured tones. Article 7 exists to prevent member species from feeling excluded from Council operations. However, it also includes provisions for practical limitations. Your kinetic weapons would be ineffective against any serious threat to Council space. Granting you military authorization would be a symbolic gesture at best, potentially dangerous at worst. Dangerous to whom? Elena asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. The question seemed to catch the delegates off guard. General Thrax's mandibles clicked in confusion. To yourselves, obviously. Humans attempting to engage threats capable of challenging Council forces would result in wholesale slaughter. Your ships are barely capable of interplanetary travel, let alone interstellar combat. Elena nodded slowly, as if accepting this logic. So the Council's position is that human weapons are too primitive to be effective against any meaningful threat. Precisely, High Chancellor Vordhak confirmed, his crystalline form brightening with what seemed like relief at her understanding. We are not disparaging your species' efforts, Ambassador. Every civilization must start somewhere. In perhaps a few centuries, when humanity has had time to properly develop, we can revisit this discussion. The chamber filled with sounds of agreement from dozens of species. Elena looked around at the assembled delegates, each representing civilizations that had been spacefaring when her ancestors were still discovering agriculture. She saw the genuine, if condescending, kindness in their refusal. They truly believed they were protecting humanity from itself. I appreciate the Council's concern for human welfare, Elena said carefully. However, I must formally request that this matter be put to a vote. The Council Charter requires that all military authorization requests receive a full democratic hearing. High Chancellor Vordhak's colors shifted to what Elena had learned indicated mild annoyance. If you insist, Ambassador, though I fear the result will be decisive. The voting began immediately. Elena watched the great board that displayed the Council's decision matrix as votes registered from 1,247 different species. The results came in faster than she could track, denial after denial, some including additional commentary about humanity's youth as a species or suggestions for alternative contributions to Council operations. When the final vote was tallied, the result was overwhelming: 1,244 votes against military authorization, with only 3 abstentions. No species had voted in favor of humanity's request. Elena stood in the silence that followed, feeling the weight of over 1,000 gazes upon her. She had expected this outcome, but seeing it displayed so starkly still stung. The human delegation behind her remained perfectly still, their faces carefully neutral. The Council has spoken, High Chancellor Vordhak announced formally. Humanity's request for military authorization is denied. However, we would be pleased to discuss alternative forms of contribution to Council operations. Your species has shown remarkable creativity in artistic endeavors, and there are always positions available in cultural exchange programs. The subtle insult wasn't lost on anyone in the chamber. Elena felt her diplomatic training warring with her more basic human instincts. 3 years of careful relationship building had led to this moment, and now the Council was essentially offering humanity the role of galactic entertainers. I understand the Council's decision, Elena said slowly, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. However, I would like to make a formal statement for the record. High Chancellor Vordhak's colors shifted to indicate mild interest. Proceed, Ambassador. Elena straightened her shoulders and looked directly at the massive crystalline being. Humanity accepts the Council's assessment of our current technological limitations. We acknowledge that our weapons appear primitive by galactic standards. However, we would like to note that throughout human history, victory in conflict has rarely been determined solely by technological superiority. A ripple of what might have been polite interest passed through the chamber. Ambassador Zelix's tentacles formed patterns indicating curiosity. Please elaborate, Ambassador Vasquez. Human history is filled with examples of supposedly superior forces being defeated by those they considered inferior, Elena explained. Technology, while important, is only one factor in warfare. Strategy, adaptability, determination, and occasionally pure stubbornness have often proven more decisive than superior weapons. General Thrax's clicking took on an amused tone. Ambassador, surely you do not mean to suggest that human determination could overcome plasma weaponry or quantum disruptors? Elena smiled, an expression that her briefing materials had noted made many alien species uncomfortable due to the display of teeth. Not at all, General. I'm simply noting that underestimation has historically proven to be a dangerous mistake. But, of course, that's merely human perspective. We respect the Council's superior experience in these matters. The subtle challenge in her words wasn't lost on the more perceptive delegates, but most seemed to interpret it as wounded pride rather than a serious warning. High Chancellor Vordhak's colors shifted to a more sympathetic hue. Ambassador Vasquez, please do not take the Council's decision as a reflection on humanity's value as a member species. Every civilization brings unique gifts to the galactic community. Perhaps humanity's contribution lies in areas other than military affairs. Elena bowed formally, a gesture she had learned carried appropriate respect in most council cultures. Thank you, High Chancellor. Humanity will, of course, abide by the council's decision. We would not dream of acting contrary to the wishes of our esteemed colleagues. As the session concluded and delegates began to disperse, Elena noticed several alien representatives approaching her delegation with what seemed like genuine sympathy. Ambassador Zelix floated over in her atmospheric bubble, her tentacles forming apologetic patterns. Ambassador Vasquez, please do not let today's proceedings discourage you. The Council values humanity's unique perspective on many issues. Your species' rapid adaptation to galactic society has been remarkable. Thank you, Ambassador Zelix. That means a great deal coming from you. Constructor Prime Zeroth 9 approached with mechanical precision, his optical sensors focusing on Elena. Ambassador, the mechanoids would be interested in examining human manufacturing techniques. Your species' approaches to problem-solving often display unexpected efficiency despite technological limitations. Elena nodded graciously. We would be honored to share our methods with the mechanoids. Perhaps we can arrange a cultural exchange in the near future. As the various delegates made their farewells and departed, Elena found herself alone with her human delegation in the vast, now empty chamber. Her aide, Commander Sarah Chun, approached with a data pad containing preliminary analysis of the day's proceedings. The reaction was exactly as predicted, Chun reported quietly. Complete dismissal based on technological inferiority, with offers of cultural participation as consolation prizes. Elena nodded, her diplomatic mask finally relaxing slightly. And the secondary objectives? Achieved completely. We now have detailed scans of every major council species' defensive technologies, complete behavioral profiles of their key military leaders, and confirmation of their tactical assumptions regarding human capabilities. Another member of the delegation, Dr. Marcus Webb, approached with his own report. The intelligence gathering exceeded expectations. Their casual discussion of weapons capabilities revealed several critical vulnerabilities in their tactical thinking. They're particularly overconfident about their defensive matrices against kinetic weapons. Elena allowed herself a small, genuine smile. And their assessment of our technological capabilities? Exactly what we hoped for, Dr. Webb continued. They see our weapons as primitive curiosities, incapable of threatening any serious military force. They've completely overlooked the advantages of kinetic weapons in certain tactical situations. Commander Chin checked her chronometer. The transport back to Earth departs in 6 hours. Shall I prepare the preliminary report for command? Yes, but keep it brief for now. The full analysis will take weeks to complete properly. Elena looked around the empty chamber one more time, memorizing every detail. This went exactly as we needed it to go. As the human delegation gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Elena felt a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. The Galactic Council had reacted exactly as human strategists had predicted they would. Their overconfidence in technology, their dismissal of human capabilities, their complete inability to conceive of warfare beyond their established paradigms. All of it had been confirmed in this single session. The humans departed the council chamber with polite dignity, leaving behind the impression of a disappointed but respectful younger species accepting their place in the galactic hierarchy. None of the council delegates who had observed their departure could have imagined that they had just witnessed the final phase of the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in human history. 3 months later, the first distress signal reached council space from the Outer Rim territories. The message was fragmented and filled with interference, but the core information was clear. An unknown force had attacked the mining colony on Zirian 7. The attackers had completely destroyed the settlement and orbital facilities before disappearing without a trace. Council investigation teams arrived within days, led by a joint force of Zephyrian scouts and Crothry military specialists. What they found defied explanation by any known galactic warfare paradigms. The destruction was total but achieved through methods that seemed impossibly primitive. The orbital stations hadn't been destroyed by energy weapons or quantum disruptors. Instead, They showed impact damage consistent with high-velocity kinetic projectiles. But that was impossible. No known pirate faction or rogue state possessed kinetic weapons capable of such destruction, and certainly none could have penetrated the station's defensive matrices. Ground installations told a similar story. Buildings had been destroyed not by plasma bombardment or molecular disintegration, but by what appeared to be chemical explosives delivered with surgical precision. Security footage, where it survived, showed brief glimpses of attackers moving with coordination and purpose, but their equipment appeared almost laughably primitive by galactic standards. The investigation teams sent their reports back to the Council with growing confusion. The attack patterns suggested a military force with intimate knowledge of Council defensive systems and tactical doctrines, but using weapons that should have been completely ineffective against modern defenses. High Chancellor Vordhak convened an emergency session to discuss the Zirian 7 incident. The crystalline being's colors shifted through spectrums, indicating deep concern as he addressed the assembled delegates. The attack on Zirian 7 presents us with an unprecedented mystery, he announced. The destruction is total, the methods unknown, and the perpetrators have vanished without a trace. All Council forces in the region have been placed on high alert. Ambassador Zelix's tentacles formed patterns of confusion and worry. The evidence suggests kinetic weapons and chemical explosives, but nothing in our intelligence databases indicates any faction capable of employing such methods effectively against Council installations. General Thrax's mandibles clicked with agitation. The tactical analysis defies logic. How could primitive weapons penetrate defenses designed to withstand plasma bombardment? Either our understanding of the attacker's capabilities is fundamentally flawed, or we're dealing with a completely unknown technology. Constructor Prime Zeroth 9 processed the data with mechanical precision. Preliminary analysis suggests the attackers possessed detailed intelligence regarding defensive matrix frequencies and rotation patterns. This indicates either a significant security breach or involvement by parties with access to classified Council information. The discussion continued for hours, with delegates from hundreds of species offering theories and analysis. Some suggested it might be a test of new weapons by an established Council member. Others wondered if an ancient, dormant civilization had awakened with technology that only appeared primitive while operating on principles unknown to current galactic science. None of the assembled delegates thought to ask about humanity's whereabouts during the attack, or to question why the human ambassador was not present for this emergency session. According to diplomatic records, the human delegation had returned to Earth weeks ago and had been conducting routine internal consultations ever since. The second attack came just days later. The trading hub at Kaulo Station had been one of the most secure installations in the Outer Rim. Protected by overlapping defensive grids from 3 different Council species and staffed by a mixed garrison of Crothery warriors and mechanoid security units, it should have been impregnable to any known threat. When the emergency beacon activated, Council Command assumed it was a malfunction or a false alarm. Captain Vexhai of the Crothery Cruiser Blade of Storms arrived at Kaulo Station, expecting to find a minor technical issue requiring standard maintenance protocols. Instead, his sensors detected nothing but debris and radiation signatures. The massive trading complex, which had served millions of traders from hundreds of species, had been completely destroyed. By the Queen's claws, Vexheim muttered, his mandibles clicking in disbelief as he stared at the tactical display. What manner of weapon could do this? His tactical officer, Subcommander Thrix, adjusted the sensor arrays for maximum resolution. Sir, the debris patterns are consistent with kinetic impact damage. Multiple high-velocity projectiles striking critical structural points simultaneously. That's impossible, Vexhai replied immediately. Kaulo Station's defensive matrix could vaporize any kinetic projectile before it came within 1,000 kilometers. You must be misreading the data. Sir, I've run the analysis 3 times. The evidence is consistent. Furthermore, there are traces of chemical explosive residue throughout the debris field. The attackers used primitive weapons, but somehow made them devastatingly effective. Captain Vexhai's ship was joined within hours by a full Council investigation fleet. Draconis science vessels began detailed analysis of the destruction, while Zephyrian scouts spread out to search for any trace of the attacking force. The Etherian deep space monitoring ship Wisdom of Ages deployed its most sophisticated sensor arrays to examine the quantum echoes left by whatever had destroyed Kalos Station. Commander Lyseth of the Etherian vessel contacted Vex-High with preliminary findings that only deepened the mystery. Captain, our analysis confirms your tactical officer's assessment. Kinetic weapons and chemical explosives were responsible for this destruction. But the precision of the attack suggests attackers with intimate knowledge of station defenses and optimal target selection. Who has access to that level of classified information? Vex-High demanded. That, Commander Lyseth replied, her crystalline voice carrying undertones of deep concern, is exactly what we need to determine. The attackers struck every critical system simultaneously, bypassed or neutralized all defensive measures, and escaped without leaving a single trace of their identity or technology. The investigation teams spent days analyzing every fragment of debris, every radiation signature, every quantum echo in the system. What they discovered painted a picture of an attack so perfectly executed that it defied conventional understanding of warfare. The attacking force had somehow approached Kalos Station without being detected by its sensor arrays. They had launched their assault with weapons that, while primitive by galactic standards, had been employed with surgical precision against targets that suggested complete understanding of the station's design and vulnerabilities. Most disturbing of all, they had accomplished total destruction in less than 15 minutes before vanishing completely. Back at Council headquarters, emergency sessions were being called daily as reports flooded in from investigation teams. High Chancellor Vorthack's crystalline form had taken on darker hues that indicated stress levels rarely seen in Etherian leaders. We are dealing with an unknown military force of unprecedented capability, he announced to the assembled emergency council. Their methods appear primitive, but their execution is flawless. They strike without warning, achieve total victory, and disappear without a trace. Ambassador Zelix floated in her atmospheric sphere, tentacles forming patterns of deep confusion. The psychological profile makes no sense. They're using kinetic weapons and chemical explosives like some pre-spaceflight civilization, but demonstrating tactical knowledge and operational security that surpasses our most elite forces. General Thrax had been studying the attack patterns obsessively since the first incident. I believe we're dealing with a sophisticated deception operation. The primitive weapons are intentional, designed to confuse us and mask their true capabilities. No force using such methods could achieve these results without access to technology we don't recognize. Constructor Prime Zeroth 9 had been running continuous analysis since the first attack. Probability matrices suggest the attackers possess detailed intelligence regarding Council military doctrines, defensive technologies, and strategic planning methodologies. Either they have infiltrated our highest levels of command, or they have developed analytical capabilities that exceed our own. The debate continued for hours, but no delegate could offer a satisfactory explanation for the attacks. Some proposed that an ancient civilization had awakened with technology that only appeared primitive while operating on unknown principles. Others suggested that the attacks might be tests conducted by an existing council member using experimental weapons designed to appear primitive while incorporating advanced principles. None of them suspected the truth, that somewhere in a star system dismissed as technologically insignificant, human military planners were reviewing the success of their initial operations with quiet satisfaction. Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the command center of the newly constructed military complex hidden in the asteroid belt of the Sol system. Around her, holographic displays showed real-time intelligence data streaming in from across Council space. The success of the first two operations had exceeded even their most optimistic projections. "Status report," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. Colonel Marcus Webb approached with a data tablet containing detailed analysis of Council responses to their operations. Both strikes achieved all primary objectives with 0 casualties on our side. Council forces arrived at each target location exactly as predicted, followed standard investigation protocols, and reach the conclusions we wanted them to reach. And their tactical assessment? Perfect confusion, as expected. They're interpreting our kinetic weapons and chemical explosives as either primitive technology used by unknown actors or sophisticated deception designed to hide advanced capabilities they can't detect. Neither conclusion leads them to the truth. Admiral Chen nodded with satisfaction. What about their defensive adjustments? Minimal and predictable, Colonel Webb continued. They're reinforcing energy shielding and quantum defensive matrices while largely ignoring kinetic protection. Their tactical doctrine assumes that any serious threat must involve energy weapons or exotic matter manipulation. Another officer, Commander Lisa Park, joined them with intelligence updates. Surveillance indicates that Council forces are completely mystified by our operational methods. They're expending enormous resources trying to understand how primitive weapons could be so effective, but they're analyzing the problem from entirely wrong assumptions. Admiral Chen studied the tactical displays surrounding them. Excellent. The Council's overconfidence in their technology is working exactly as predicted. They cannot conceive that kinetic weapons might have advantages they've overlooked in their rush to develop more exotic systems. What about the next phase? Colonel Webb asked. We proceed as planned. 3 more strikes, each demonstrating different aspects of kinetic warfare that Council forces are unprepared for. We want them completely convinced that whoever is attacking them possesses some unknown form of advanced technology disguised as primitive weapons. The human military complex was a testament to years of preparation that had begun the moment first contact with the Galactic Council had been established. While Council delegates saw only a species struggling to adapt to galactic civilization, human strategic planners had been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence operation in their species' history. Every diplomatic meeting, every cultural exchange, every seemingly innocent question about galactic military doctrine had been part of a massive information-gathering effort. Human engineers had studied Council defensive technologies not to understand how they worked, but to identify their weaknesses. Human strategists had analyzed galactic warfare doctrine not to learn from it, but to find ways to counter it. The key insight had come from recognizing that the Council's advanced technology created specific blind spots in their tactical thinking. Energy weapons and exotic matter manipulation were incredibly powerful, but they operated according to principles that made certain assumptions about how warfare was conducted. Those assumptions created vulnerabilities that kinetic weapons could exploit. A plasma shield designed to deflect directed energy was largely useless against solid matter traveling at sufficient velocity. A quantum defensive matrix that could neutralize exotic matter had no effect on simple metal projectiles. Defense systems optimized for threats operating at light speed often couldn't adjust quickly enough to track objects moving at merely supersonic velocities. Most importantly, Council military doctrine had evolved around the assumption that any serious threat would employ technology comparable to their own. They had defensive measures for plasma weapons, quantum disruptors, temporal distortion fields, and dozens of other exotic attack methods. They had nothing in place to deal with enemies who deliberately chose to use primitive kinetic weapons with sufficient sophistication to exploit the gaps in advanced defenses. Initiate the next phase, Admiral Chen commanded. Target selection is confirmed. We hit the shipyard at Drexel Prime in 72 hours. Drexel Prime was one of the most heavily defended installations in Council space. The massive shipyard complex was protected by defensive systems from half a dozen different species and garrisoned by elite forces from the Draconis Imperial Fleet. It was considered absolutely impregnable by conventional means, which was exactly why the humans had chosen it as their next target. 3 days later, the shipyard at Drexel Prime erupted in a series of precisely timed explosions that destroyed the entire complex in less than 20 minutes. Emergency response teams arrived to find the same impossible evidence. Total destruction achieved through kinetic weapons and chemical explosives that should have been completely ineffective against the installation's advanced defenses. The attack on Drexel Prime sent shockwaves through the Galactic Council that were felt at every level of civilization. This was no longer a mysterious threat striking remote outposts. This was a direct assault on one of the most secure military installations in known space, carried out with the same impossible methods that had become the unknown attacker's signature. High Chancellor Vorthak called an emergency session of the full council, including representatives from species that rarely participated in general sessions. The crystalline being's colors had shifted to deep reds and purples, indicating stress levels that bordered on panic. "Fellow delegates," he announced, his voice carrying harmonics of barely controlled alarm. "We face a threat unlike any in recorded galactic history. An unknown force has demonstrated the ability to destroy our most secure installations using methods that our military doctrine considered obsolete millennia ago." The chamber filled with sounds of distress, confusion, and anger from hundreds of species. Ambassador Zelix's tentacles formed patterns of urgent communication as she spoke from within her atmospheric sphere. "High Chancellor, the tactical implications are staggering. If these attackers can neutralize Drexel Prime's defenses, no Council installation can be considered secure. We must assume that our entire defensive strategy has been compromised." General Thrax's mandibles clicked with aggressive determination. "We need to mobilize every available military asset. Whatever these attackers represent, they must be found and eliminated before they can strike again." Constructor Prime Zeroth 9 had been analyzing the attack data continuously since the first reports arrived. Preliminary calculations suggest the attackers possess intelligence assets within our highest levels of command, or analytical capabilities that exceed our most sophisticated artificial intelligences. Their target selection, timing, and methodology indicate complete understanding of Council military capabilities and limitations. The debate that followed was unlike anything in Council history. For the first time since the formation of galactic civilization, member species were genuinely afraid of an external threat. The unknown attackers had demonstrated capabilities that seemed to make all Council defenses meaningless, while remaining completely invisible to every detection and analysis system available to galactic science. What terrified them most was the primitive nature of the weapons being used. Energy shields, quantum matrices, and exotic matter defenses were useless against simple metal projectiles and chemical explosives. It was as if some cosmic joke was being played on their advanced civilization, defeated by technology they had abandoned before achieving space flight. "We must consider," announced Ambassador Helix of the Quantum Confederation, her voice modulated through harmonic crystals, "that these attacks may represent a test of our defenses by an existing Council member. The level of intelligence required suggests access to our most classified military information." The suggestion caused an uproar among the assembled delegates. The idea that a member species might be responsible for the attacks introduced possibilities for political chaos that could tear the Council apart. High Chancellor Vorthak's colors shifted rapidly through spectrums indicating severe distress. Such accusations cannot be made without overwhelming evidence. To suggest that a member species would attack Council installations would undermine the very foundation of our civilization. "Then, how," demanded General Thrax, "do we explain their precise knowledge of our defensive capabilities? How do we account for their ability to strike our most secure installations without leaving any trace of their technology or identity?" The questions hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Council believed about their technological superiority and military invincibility. For thousands of years, their advanced weapons and sophisticated defenses had made them the undisputed masters of the galaxy. Now, someone was making their most sophisticated systems look like children's toys. As the emergency session continued deep into the night cycle, none of the assembled delegates thought to inquire about the human delegation's absence. According to diplomatic records, humanity was still conducting internal consultations and would return to Council space when their deliberations were complete. The next attack came before the Council could implement any new defensive measures. The fortress world of Titan's Gate had been considered unassailable for over 3,000 years. Built into the surface of a massive asteroid and protected by defensive systems representing the pinnacle of galactic military engineering, it served as the primary command center for Council military operations in the outer spiral arm. The installation housed the combined fleet headquarters of 6 major species and contained enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. When Titan's Gate went silent during a routine communication check, Council Command initially assumed it was a technical malfunction. The fortress's communication arrays were quintuple redundant and protected by hardened quantum channels. Nothing short of a stellar-level catastrophe should have been able to interrupt their signals. The first response ship to reach Titan's Gate found nothing but a field of debris where the mighty fortress had once stood. The asteroid itself had been completely destroyed, broken apart by a series of precisely placed explosions that had targeted the exact stress points necessary to achieve total structural failure. The tactical analysis that followed would haunt Council military planners for generations. Admiral Keltar of the Draconis Imperial Fleet stared at the tactical display aboard his flagship, the Stellar Dominance, unable to comprehend what his sensors were telling him. "Run the analysis again," he commanded his tactical officer. "These readings cannot be correct." "Sir," replied Commander THYSS, her scaled hands working frantically at the control interfaces. "I've run the analysis 7 times. The results are consistent. Titan's Gate was destroyed by kinetic impactors and shaped chemical charges. The attack pattern suggests projectile weapons fired from multiple vectors simultaneously." Admiral Keltar's massive form trembled with disbelief. Titan's Gate was protected by a Class Omega defensive matrix. Nothing employing kinetic weapons could have approached within 100,000 kilometers without being vaporized. "Sir," Commander THYSS continued reluctantly, "the debris patterns suggest the attackers somehow disabled the defensive matrix before beginning their assault. They had perfect knowledge of its operating frequencies, rotation patterns, and power distribution systems. The impossible had happened again, but this time the scale was beyond anything the Council had experienced. Titan's Gate hadn't been an outpost or trading station. It had been the military heart of an entire sector, protected by defenses that represented millennia of technological advancement. Its destruction proved that nowhere in Council space was truly safe from these mysterious attackers. Within hours, every major Council military installation had been placed on maximum alert. Fleet commanders who had never experienced real combat found themselves desperately trying to understand an enemy that seemed to operate according to no known principles of warfare. Emergency councils were called on dozens of worlds as species that had known peace for centuries suddenly faced the prospect of annihilation. High Chancellor Vorthak convened the most urgent session in Council history. His crystalline form had taken on colors that most delegates had never seen before, deep crimson shot through with veins of black that indicated fear approaching panic. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made every translation device in the chamber resonate with alarm. "Fellow delegates, we stand at the precipice of a crisis that threatens the very existence of our civilization. The unknown force responsible for these attacks has demonstrated the ability to destroy our most powerful military installations with weapons that our science dismissed as obsolete before we achieved interstellar travel." The chamber erupted in chaos as hundreds of species voiced their terror and confusion simultaneously. Ambassador Zelix's tentacles writhed in patterns that indicated pure panic, while General Thrax's mandibles clicked so rapidly they created a continuous chittering sound. Even the normally composed mechanoids emitted electronic sounds that their translators rendered as expressions of malfunction and system failure. "Order," High Chancellor Vorthak commanded, his voice modulated to frequencies that demanded attention from every species present. "We must approach this crisis with rationality and cooperation. Our survival may depend on our ability to adapt to this threat." Constructor Prime Zeroth 9 had been processing data from all 3 attacks continuously since Titan's Gate was destroyed. His optical sensors focused on the assembly as he spoke with mechanical precision. "Analysis of attack patterns indicates an enemy with perfect intelligence regarding our military capabilities, defensive technologies, and strategic doctrines. They strike with surgical precision using weapons we considered harmless, then disappear without leaving any technological signatures we can identify." "How is such a thing possible?" demanded Ambassador Crix of the Neural Collective, her psychic projections carrying undertones of desperation. "Our defensive matrices were designed to counter every known form of attack. How can primitive kinetic weapons penetrate quantum shields and energy barriers?" General Thrax had been obsessively studying the tactical data, searching for some explanation that made sense within established military doctrine. I believe the answer lies in our assumptions about warfare itself. Our defenses were designed to counter sophisticated energy weapons, exotic matter manipulation, and quantum-level attacks. We never considered that an enemy might deliberately choose primitive weapons specifically to exploit the gaps in our advanced systems. The terrible logic of his statement settled over the assembly like a suffocating blanket. Their technological superiority, the very foundation of their confidence, had become their greatest vulnerability. An enemy using primitive weapons was like a virus attacking a body protected against every known disease except the common cold. But who? Ambassador Zelix asked, her tentacles forming patterns of desperate inquiry. What civilization possesses the intelligence and capability to mount such attacks while using weapons that predate galactic civilization? High Chancellor Vorthack's colors shifted through spectrums indicating deep thought combined with growing dread. There are several possibilities we must consider. An ancient civilization that has awakened and chosen to test our defenses. A rogue faction within the council itself conducting some form of elaborate deception. Or, he paused, his crystalline form dimming as he considered possibilities too terrible to voice immediately. Or what? High Chancellor, pressed General Thrax. Or we are dealing with a completely unknown form of intelligence that has been observing and analyzing our civilization while we remained unaware of their presence. An intelligence sophisticated enough to recognize the weaknesses in our military doctrine while possessing the discipline to employ primitive weapons with devastating effectiveness. The implications of this possibility sent waves of horror through the assembled delegates. The idea that they had been watched and studied by an unknown intelligence while believing themselves to be the masters of the galaxy was almost too terrible to contemplate. Ambassador Zelix's tentacles formed patterns of urgent communication. High Chancellor, we must consider implementing emergency protocols. If these attacks continue, they could destabilize our entire civilization. Fear and panic are already spreading through council space. What protocols? General Thrax demanded. Our military doctrine has been proven useless against this threat. Our most advanced defenses are meaningless against enemies using primitive weapons with surgical precision. How do we protect ourselves against an enemy we cannot understand? The question hung in the air like an accusation against everything the council represented. For thousands of years, their advanced technology had been their guarantee of safety and supremacy. Now, that same technology was revealed as a liability that made them vulnerable to attacks they could neither comprehend nor counter. Constructor Prime Zeroth 9 processed the tactical implications with ruthless mechanical logic. Immediate defensive modifications are required. All installations must implement kinetic barriers in addition to energy shields. Sensor arrays must be reconfigured to detect primitive as well as advanced threats. Military doctrines must be completely revised to account for enemies using deliberately primitive weapons. The resources required for such modifications would be staggering. Ambassador Helix of the Quantum Confederation pointed out. We would essentially need to rebuild our entire defensive infrastructure while maintaining protection against conventional threats. The alternative, High Chancellor Vorthack replied grimly, is the continued systematic destruction of our military capabilities until our civilization collapses entirely. As the emergency session continued, desperate plans were proposed and debated. Some delegates suggested attempting diplomatic contact with the unknown attackers, though no one could explain how to communicate with enemies who left no traces of their technology or identity. Others proposed massive military mobilizations, though previous attacks had proven that conventional council forces were helpless against these mysterious enemies. None of the assembled delegates thought to question why the human delegation remained absent from these critical discussions. According to diplomatic records, humanity was still engaged in internal consultations and would return to council space when their deliberations were complete. The timing of their absence during this crisis period was noted by several intelligence services, but dismissed as coincidental. Meanwhile, in the hidden asteroid belt complex of the Sol system, Admiral Chun watched the real-time intelligence feeds from council space with professional satisfaction. The psychological warfare phase of their operation was proceeding exactly as planned. Status report on Council military modifications, she commanded. Colonel Webb consulted his tactical displays before responding. They're beginning to implement kinetic barriers on major installations, but the modifications will take months to complete and will significantly weaken their defenses against energy weapons. They're also reconfiguring sensor arrays, but their new detection patterns have predictable blind spots we can exploit. Excellent. And their fleet dispositions. Complete chaos, Commander Park reported. Fleet commanders are pulling ships back from forward positions to protect core systems, leaving their outer territories essentially undefended. Military coordination is breaking down as species prioritize protecting their own installations over maintaining collective defense. Admiral Chen nodded with satisfaction. The psychological pressure is working perfectly. They're making exactly the tactical mistakes we predicted they would make. Fear is overriding their strategic thinking. What about the revelation phase? Colonel Webb asked. We proceed as planned. One final demonstration to prove that conventional council forces are completely helpless against our methods, followed by the diplomatic revelation that will reshape the balance of power in this galaxy forever. The final phase of humanity's plan was the most audacious yet. Rather than striking another installation, they would engage and destroy an entire council fleet in open combat. This would prove beyond question that kinetic weapons could not only penetrate council defenses, but could defeat their most advanced warships in direct confrontation. The target was Admiral Keltar's fleet, which had been patrolling the Outer Rim since the destruction of Titan's Gate. 12 ships representing the finest military technology of the Draconis Imperial Fleet, including the massive flagship Stellar Dominance, would face a human force that appeared laughably inferior by every measure of galactic warfare. Admiral Chen's task force consisted of 6 ships built using human technology that the Galactic Council had dismissed as primitive curiosities. Their hulls were constructed from simple metal alloys rather than exotic matter composites. Their weapons were kinetic accelerators that fired solid projectiles instead of plasma or quantum disruptors. Their propulsion systems used controlled fusion rather than zero-point energy manipulation. By galactic standards, they were museum pieces that belonged in a display of primitive spacefaring technology. But they had been designed by human engineers who understood exactly how to exploit the weaknesses in advanced galactic defensive systems. All ships report ready for combat operations, reported Commander Park from the bridge of the human flagship, Terra's Vengeance. Excellent, Admiral Chen replied. Begin the final phase. Send the message to Admiral Keltar. The communication that reached the Draconis fleet was unlike anything in galactic military history. It was a formal challenge to open combat, transmitted on standard council frequencies using perfect diplomatic protocols. Admiral Keltar, the message began. This is Admiral Chen of the human fleet Terra's Vengeance. We are responsible for the recent attacks on council installations. We challenge your fleet to open combat to demonstrate the effectiveness of human military capabilities. If you accept our challenge, we will engage your forces at the coordinates attached to this message. If you decline, we will continue targeting council installations until you have no choice but to face us. Admiral Keltar stared at the message display for several minutes, unable to process what he was reading. When he finally found his voice, it came out as a roar that echoed throughout the bridge of the Stellar Dominance. Humans? Humans are responsible for this. His massive claws scraped against the command console as he tried to comprehend the impossible. The same species whose military authorization we denied because their weapons were too primitive to be effective? His tactical officer, Commander HFY, was running rapid analysis on the message's transmission data. Sir, the signal originated from a fleet of 6 ships approximately 50,000 kilometers from our position. Sensors indicate human vessel configurations matching their known technological capabilities. Show me, Admiral Keltar commanded. The tactical display filled with images of the human fleet, and Admiral Keltar felt his understanding of reality begin to collapse. The ships were exactly what human technology should produce: metal hulls with kinetic weapons and primitive propulsion systems. They looked like toys compared to his advanced Draconis warships. Sir, Commander HFY said hesitantly, are these the enemies that destroyed Titan's Gate? How could such primitive vessels pose any threat to our fleet? Admiral Keltar's mind raced through the implications. If humans were truly responsible for the attacks, it meant that Earth's species had been conducting the most sophisticated deception operation in galactic history. While pretending to be technological primitives seeking acceptance in galactic civilization, they had been planning and executing military operations that had brought the Council to the edge of panic. Send a message to Council Command immediately, he ordered. Inform them that we have identified the unknown attackers as human forces and are moving to engage. Then, prepare the fleet for combat operations. Sir, our standard tactics should be more than sufficient against primitive human technology. Should we modify our battle formation? Admiral Keltar considered the question carefully. Everything he knew about human capabilities suggested that his fleet could destroy their 6 ships without suffering any damage. But the attacks on Council installations proved that human capabilities had been severely underestimated. No modifications, he decided finally. We engage using standard protocols, but remain alert for any unexpected tactics. If humans have found ways to make primitive weapons effective against our installations, they may have developed similar innovations for ship-to-ship combat. The two fleets faced each other across the cold vacuum of space, representing a confrontation between technological paradigms separated by millennia of advancement. On one side, 12 Draconis warships armed with plasma cannons, quantum disruptors, and protected by energy shields that could deflect stellar radiation. On the other, 6 human vessels with metal hulls and kinetic weapons that fired simple projectiles at supersonic speeds. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of Terra's Vengeance, watching the tactical display show Admiral Keltar's fleet moving into standard Council battle formation. All ships, confirm weapon status. Terra's Retribution reports ready. Earth's Hammer reports ready. Humanity's Pride reports ready. Soul's Justice reports ready. Freedom's Edge reports ready. Admiral Chen smiled grimly as she gave the order that would change galactic history forever. All ships, engage the enemy. Show them what human weapons can really do. The battle that followed lasted only 17 minutes, but its consequences would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy for generations to come. Human kinetic weapons, fired with precision that exploited every weakness in Draconis defensive systems, systematically destroyed Admiral Keltar's fleet, while the advanced alien warships proved helpless to mount any effective defense. The first salvo from the human fleet demonstrated the fatal flaw in energy-based defensive systems when confronting solid matter traveling at sufficient velocity. Draconis shields designed to deflect directed energy simply couldn't stop metal projectiles that carried too much kinetic energy to be easily deflected. Admiral Keltar watched in horror as his flagship's shields failed to prevent human projectiles from punching through the hull and detonating shaped charges that had been precisely designed to exploit structural weaknesses in Draconis ship design. How? He demanded of his tactical officer as his fleet died around him. How are their primitive weapons destroying our ships? Sir, Commander THYSS reported with desperation in her voice. Their projectiles are exploiting the gaps between our shield rotation cycles. They're firing in patterns that precisely target the intervals when our defenses are recalibrating. They know our defensive systems better than we do. The terrible truth became clear as the human fleet methodically dismantled the Draconis force. The humans hadn't just been observing Council civilization for 3 years. They had been studying every aspect of galactic military technology with the focused intensity of a species preparing for war. When the last Draconis ship was reduced to wreckage, Admiral Chen opened a general communication channel that would be heard throughout Council space. "This is Admiral Chen of the human fleet," she announced, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone delivering a prepared statement. "We have successfully demonstrated human military capabilities against Council forces. We are prepared to discuss the terms of humanity's proper place in galactic civilization." The message was heard simultaneously on every world in Council space, transmitted through communication relays that humans had apparently compromised years ago. Its implications were clear to every intelligence that received it. The species that the Galactic Council had dismissed as primitive had just proven they could destroy any Council force with embarrassing ease. High Chancellor Vorthak received the message aboard his personal command ship while traveling to an emergency council session. His crystalline form cycled through colors that indicated a complete system overload as he tried to process the reality of the situation. "Humans," he whispered, the sound carrying harmonics of disbelief and dawning horror. "We've been outmaneuvered by the species we considered technological children." The formal response came within hours. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, who had been absent from council space for months while supposedly conducting internal consultations, requested an emergency session to discuss humanity's military authorization request. When she appeared before the assembled council delegates, her demeanor was completely different from the respectful junior diplomat who had been denied weapons authorization months ago. She carried herself with the confidence of someone representing a species that had just proven they could destroy galactic civilization if they chose to do so. "Esteemed delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix, "humanity wishes to renew our request for military authorization. Recent events have demonstrated that our weapons, while primitive by your standards, possess certain practical advantages in specific tactical situations." The chamber was silent except for the mechanical sounds of translation devices processing her words. Every delegate present understood that they were listening to the representative of a species that had just rewritten the rules of galactic warfare. High Chancellor Vorthak's crystalline form had stabilized to colors indicating resignation and grudging respect. "Ambassador Vasquez, the Council acknowledges that our previous assessment of human military capabilities was incomplete. What terms does humanity propose?" Elena smiled, the expression that had once made alien delegates uncomfortable now carrying implications that terrified them. "Humanity seeks full military authorization, membership in the Council Strategic Planning Committee, and recognition as a major military power. In exchange, we offer our unique expertise in kinetic warfare and defensive strategies that your current enemies cannot counter." The voting was swift and unanimous. Humanity was granted everything they requested, along with additional concessions that no delegate dared to withhold from a species that had proven they could destroy Council civilization while making it look effortless. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out with expressions of shock and defeat, Elena remained at the human delegation's platform. Commander Chen approached with a final status report. "All objectives achieved beyond our most optimistic projections," Chen reported quietly. "Council military command structure is in complete disarray. Their defensive doctrines have been proven worthless, and every species now understands that humans represent the dominant military force in the galaxy." Elena nodded with satisfaction. "And the secondary objectives?" "Exceeded completely. We now have permanent seats on every major council committee, access to galactic technology databases, and formal recognition as a major power. Plus, every species in the galaxy will now be eager to offer us favorable trade agreements and territorial concessions." As the human delegation prepared to depart for their new quarters in the Council's high-security diplomatic sector, Elena reflected on how perfectly their plan had succeeded. The Galactic Council had made the classic mistake of assuming that technological advancement was the only measure of military capability. They had failed to understand that warfare was ultimately about imposing your will on an enemy, and that could sometimes be accomplished more effectively with primitive weapons used intelligently than with advanced technology used conventionally. Most importantly, they had underestimated humanity's greatest strength, their ability to think outside established paradigms and find solutions that more advanced civilizations couldn't conceive of because they were trapped by their own technological assumptions. The galaxy would never again make the mistake of underestimating human weapons. The species that had once been dismissed as primitive curiosities were now recognized as the most dangerous military force in known space, armed with weapons that every advanced civilization had forgotten how to defend against. And Elena suspected that this was only the beginning of humanity's rise to galactic prominence.